thanks everyone for joining. Today we have three amazing panelists talking about the best practices for data annotation projects. We have Antoine here from Kili Technology, who is Chief of Customer Success. We have Mathieu from AI for People, or as it was called before, GAMAT. And we have Paul Gaffon, who is working as a sales / tech guy at Kili Technology, who is our master at AI projects. So I'll give word to Antoine.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. Thanks for the presentation and to organize this webinar. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Antoine. I'm the head of customer success at Kili. So today we are going to talk about best practices for data annotation projects. So this is an important topic, and to join me, I am pleased to have Mathieu Varnier. And maybe Mathieu, I will let you introduce yourself a little bit deeper on your company. So maybe can we switch the slide, please, in order to let Mathieu present himself.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Antoine and Tamara, for the introduction. So I'm Mathieu Varnier. I'm AI Solution Director at People for AI. And so we have been working for the last 4 years in the data labeling domain. So we provide high quality manual data labeling for computer vision and NLP. So we stand up on 2 legs. The first leg is our 2 production centers in Madagascar, where it's like managed workforce. It's really like people who work in the production center, we are experienced labelers, reviewers, team managers who know their job, who have been working with us for years. And the other leg is the French team with like a expert about data labeling, knowing which tools, how to build a good team, how to do the project management. And we have working in many different domains, like to give a few example, microscopy, drone images, autonomous car, food tech, and many other. So yeah, I think I could say a lot of things, but we are going to speak a lot in the next slide. So Antoine, I give back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mathieu. And yes, we will talk about more deeply about your company. And just to let you know, Mathieu is a big partner for Kili, because we are working a lot with him and his teams in order to deliver high quality projects. So throughout our webinar, we will explain why these phases are necessary, what pitfalls to avoid, and some concrete examples so that you can project yourself. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer it at the end of the presentation, or come back to you tomorrow to answer it if we are running out of time. Okay. Next slide, please. So this slide is really important because it's the first step of our webinar. So here we can discover the 8 main phases necessary for a successful annotation project. So let's go intro more in detail about all these phases just after, but just let me just read it just for you. So 8 phases: the define annotation projects, plans timeline, select workforce, select annotation tool, create annotation guidelines, train workforce, manage ongoing annotation, and how to use your annotations. So yeah, this is the intro. Let's deep dive, and next slide, please. Yeah, on this slide, it may seem obvious to you, but you would be surprised to see that many of our clients, prospects, have little or no project definition, or a very few scoping project definition. So indeed, to succeed in a project, you need to have a strong a clear view about your stakeholders, and a strong view on your goals that are known by everyone in the project. So maybe Paul and Mathieu, do you have any concrete examples on this point? Why our definition of stakeholders and have a clear goals is really important?
Sure. So I could start with one of the things not to do within one of the project from my experience. So I think the key idea is it's important to have clear stakeholders, but also clear owners of the different parts of the projects. And one of the examples I'd like to take is one project in which I arrived. So we arrived at the clients during a project. It was already launched, and we're saying using Killy and helping them standardize their workflow. And actually, two people were managing the project without clear owner on the quality outcomes, and so they were not aligned on the quality levels to reach and the goals. And it ended that we ended up finding out different guidelines were given to the people of the labeling team by the two manager, which ended in us having to redo some of the labeling to meet the quality criteria of the project, and end up losing a lot of time. So having clear owner and stakeholders for each part of the project is really key to have a fluid way of working.
So I completely agree with Paul, and I have another example which is related to his example. So it was not 2 clients, but it was 5 clients. We were working with a research lab, and you had these 5 clients, and some of them were answering the question answer files, some of them were attending the meeting and not other, and it was a real nightmare. So on the client side, be really clear about who is really the owner of the project. It's super important, otherwise it's a nightmare.
Okay, thanks a lot for these those examples. Maybe next slide, please. Okay, how can we ensure that the project is well scoped? So we have identified several key points, and on this slide we will have a look on 3 of them. So identify the data and the type of labels needed. Might be obvious, but definitely you should have a look on that. Decide how best to collect the labels. And the last one, considering the budget, resources, and timetable. Again, it's maybe you can think it's obvious, but it's really key at the beginning of a project to talk about all those subjects in order to deliver on high quality projects. So maybe Mathieu and Paul, on those 3 points, do you have a remark or maybe an example of what we should do, what customers should do on this?
Sure. So on this, I think there's 2 critical questions to ask yourself really when framing the projects, which are not here, but seems trivial, but can deeply impact your project. Is how do you get the data to the labeling teams, and what you will do with the annotation once you are able to export it. And on this point, you really need to work with the engineers and with the business to understand how those bridges can be built, so that you are sure that you don't get any delay in the start of your project because data cannot be used, or data cannot be downloaded to the platform. And I think this is even more critical as when the labeling happened close to the business value. So for instance, in the financial industry, when you, for compliance checking, you have models making predictions, but you have in the meantime humans working on the label data. And in that case, it's really key to have those bridge builds. And another point is that data set understanding and analysis being done as early as possible will help, and that's what we see from our experience, help define correctly the budget and resources regarded to carry out the labeling project.
Yeah, for me, one of the most important thing is to be clear on the speed quality balance, because of course, like, yeah, what do you really need for your algorithm and how long it will take to label? Do you need, is a bounding box enough, or do you need precise segmentation, or is our roof polygons a good balance between the two? Of course, it's so important to find the good balance. I think one other very important aspect at the beginning, if you want to scope the project well, is to, of course, to give representative data for the test, and also not be too optimistic. Sometimes, like, it's your data, you are an expert about it, and you think it will be super fast, but don't be over optimistic. It takes time to do good labels.
Yeah, it's key. Thanks, Mathieu and Paul, for this mention. It's really key. We are working closely with Mathieu, with some customers who are experts in their domain, but they didn't know really well their data. So it's really key to have to take some time more in order to be sure in your scoping project that you will be able to handle all the data that you are showing. Next slide, please. So this slide is finally the three other crucial points that you have to see in order to scope your project. So the complexity, the retro planning, and the workforce. But the workforce, we will have a deep dive on it, which after in the presentation, so maybe we won't talk about it too much, but maybe, Paul, do you have a return maybe on the complexity of the context, the ambiguity, and maybe the ambiguity of the task that we may encounter during the scoping of the project?
Sure. So yeah, indeed. So me, I've been as part of Key Technology, I've worked a lot in helping clients building the best interface to label their data, taking into account usually two things that you want to put down is the speed of labeling, so getting the best UX for the labelers so that they can carry out the task as best as possible, but also taking into account that accuracy on complex tasks can be hard to achieve when there is too much to do on an asset. So for example, if you're doing named entity recognition with thousands of subclasses to identify a token, then it might be a good idea to have your teams focusing on some sample of the task. So having one people identifying personas within a contract and the other people identifying product code, for example. So splitting complex tasks into multiple ones can help achieve higher accuracy at the cost of spending a bit more time and complexity on the project. And yeah, what we've built at QE is really to help our customers build the best interface early in the project. And especially what we see is when people can shift also from open source solutions, new possibilities are available in Kili, and so we're here to accompany them to build interfaces that fit the best their problem. And here I have a quick example of one of our clients having to split NER and classification in a previous tool he was using, and when he shipped from us, we showed him how to combine both tasks on the same interface, and in the end to reduce the time taken to label his data set.
Yeah, this is a crucial point. Definitely it's one of our expertise at PD. So yeah, it's a very good point. Maybe we can go to the other slide. This slide is the point that we have been able to list in our many projects that can lead to delays on the customer part. So what we have listed is the client, and what just Mathieu said previously, the client has never seen the data or poorly seen the data. it might be an issue. The client has not seen enough representative data. It might be also an issue. And we have we have dealt with a lot of projects like that. And the client just underestimates the complexity of carrying out labeling projects. So yeah, these 3 points must be covered during the scoping phase of the project. And it's really, really key to be sure that you are working closely with your customer in order to be sure that he's knowing perfectly his data, and so we can achieve our goals, our main goals, to deliver the best project annotation. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So yeah, this slide is quite ambiguous. We will see what, but this slide is, we are talking about choosing the right tool for your annotation task. So, however, you should ask yourself several questions, such as, should we develop an internal tool? Should I use an open source tool or another tool? So this one inevitably will be Kili for sure. But yeah, when you are launching your project, you should ask yourself what I want to do, what I want to deliver, and which tool do I have to use in order to deliver it. So maybe Paul, because you are a lot in front of customers and prospects, can you give us some advice on this and give advice to all the people who are here?
Yeah, of course. So of course, to be fully clear, a lot of the time when doing also POCs, it's just things that will be evaluated by our prospects and clients, whether you should, well, the build versus buy aspect of the product. And something that comes out is it's not only building the interface or building the tool that will enable you to label the data, but it's also you have to take into account things that are more that would be less directly linked to labeling, such as the security aspect of the platform. So how do people access the platform securely? How do the data stay securely into your inputs, and so on and so forth. Project management aspects, collaboration aspects that usually comes into play, which makes developing an in-house tool difficult. And so what we see most of the time is with the right level of help and accompaniment also from our side, to show you also how you can integrate within our platform, and how you can go and how you can customize part of the workflow using the backend and with the support of our team. It usually balances out, because then you erase everything linked to maintenance and evolution. So you might build what we see is sometimes things are built really efficiently for one task, but then you need to evolve because you were dealing with images, and tomorrow you want to do video, and then everything has to be rebuilt, remaintained, and so of course it has to be evaluated. But building a tool from scratch is always a complex project.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Maybe Mathieu, do you have other point of view on this, because
Sure,
you are not linked to Kili, so maybe
yeah.
it would be useful to have your
as using, I have a big Kili user. I mean, I can give some examples which are related to Kili, but also can be applied on many other tools. But I think when you select a tool, it's also you have to be cautious on how to use the tool well, because now some tools like Kili have become very rich in the sense of very different, like for example, do you
features.
work on images? Do you work on sequences? Sometimes it's very clear when you need to work on images. Sometimes it's very clear when you need to work with sequences. There are some other use cases when it's not that clear. I had this example very recently, and finally we start using the images, but after reasoning, as we knew we need to use images before, images after, finally we use the sequence. And so you have to use the tool properly, to find out to use it properly. And also what I think is super important when selecting a tool is really what you can do on top of the tool, how you can build on top of the tool. And here I really think about the API, because sometimes you need some quite something very specific, which is not on the tool, but can be quite easily built if you have a nice API, if you have webhooks, if you have, like, for example, I remember we had this project with houses, and it was roof polygons, and we needed to cut the houses because it was actually not one houses, but two houses. And we built something on top of Kili with the API, with polyline that were cutting the polygon. And I think it was a great example of how to build on top of the tool something very dedicated to a specific project. So I think it's also a very important point of when you select a tool.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mathieu, for this feedback. And I think we're ready to move on. So next slide, please. Yeah, so now let's talk about the workforce. It's, I think, one of the main subjects that we want to tackle. So next slide, please. So for this slide, for this subject, this is sample. It's on the right of the slide. You have three types of options for you. So the three workforce options are the crowd, vendors, or full-time employees. To consider one of them, you have to look at the important inputs that we will see in the next slide. We'll go more in depth on these inputs. But just maybe quickly, Paul, can you give us a view on these three specific options?
Yes, of course. So what I'd have to say is what we see from the crowd just mainly is usually it can be used to quickly action on simple tasks, but things that are fairly simple, where you are going to be able to use a lot of inter-labeler agreements to compare the different labels coming from the crowd, and then you will be able to merge them using techniques and weak supervised learning techniques or things like that. But for more complex tasks where you want to teach knowledge from your teams to labelers or things more advanced, then what we see is that the lack of real-time feedback and the harder it is to have this day-to-day monitoring makes less actionable than what you could have through vendors or full-time employees.
Okay, maybe Mathieu.
Yeah, I think it's only one of the aspects, but it's a very important aspect, which is expertise. But there is different level of expertise. There is, of course, domain expertise. For example, one of my client is in food tech. We have more than 1,000 classes. It's not something you will learn in 2 days. And also, for example, working on drone, very specific things on drone images, you need to have people who are already experienced, who at least who have grown an experience on that. There is also which I think is super important and needs not to be forgotten. It's the tool expertise. These tools are not super complex, but still it takes some time to really use them, to use all the review and analytics aspects. So I think these two levels of expertise are also are very important.
Clearly, and thanks a lot to specify this. Yeah, you can go on, Paul. Thanks, Mathieu, for this point. So basically, when we see the slides and the important inputs, we can see data privacy restriction, project complexity, as you mentioned, required subject expertise, as you mentioned too, Mathieu, project lead time, quality insurance, as Paul mentioned previously, or budgetary constraints. What feedback do you have on this topic to help the people who are watching this webinar at this moment and which are wondering which options should I consider and which subject I have to see and to tackle before take my decision?
Yes, so just one note I had on that is for projects with a high level of complexity, something that is reactionable is to understand whether the task is only doable by experts, or can it be taught through training to the team? Because it will then depend on if you need to onboard full-on experts, or if you can have only a couple or few of them spending time training and reviewing the data on that task, thus leveraging and maybe help you scale your team and your operations.
Okay, Mathieu, maybe on this.
Yeah, another small thing on expertise with my experience, like with many different team of labelers. Depending on the project, the complexity is but you have to find the good, because some labelers will be good on some specific tasks, for example, where it's like very precise segmentation, so it's one expertise, and you got some other project where you have to be quicker, so it's a different kind of expertise. So you really have to identify for your project the precise level of expertise, and it's not like always the same labeler will be the best for each of these tasks. So it's very various.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for those feedbacks. Maybe next slide, please, Paul. This slide is only a sum up of the three options. So the crowd with the benefits and maybe the attention point that you need to have on this. So you have the crowd, vendors, full-time employees. So for the crowd, cost-effective, differentiated for quality, but not subject expert. For vendors, as mentioned, and I will not go through all the slide, but definitely this slide is a key takeaway for you in order to make choice for your project, for your annotation projects. You can go to the other slide, please. Yeah, so definitely this slide is one of the most important points of our webinar. So what are your best practices as an expert on workforce training? What are your best practices in order to train the workforce, in order to deliver the best projects, annotation project? So maybe Mathieu, I think it will be you. It will be for you.
Sure. Yeah. I think what is really the most important is as soon as possible to get most of the difficulty in the project. And so it means from the very beginning, even from the scoping, even before like the labelers have seen the data, during the scoping, you should first identify most of the issues. And then, of course, there is the training project, which is super important when you will start to have the data in front of the labelers, and lots of questions will arise. It's super interesting there to use question files where labelers can ask as many questions as they want. But here, that's a good aspect. Of course, I'm being myself a vendor, but that's a good point with having like a team manager, like project manager at the production center, which can filter part of this question, and which who are really good at identifying the issue, the edge cases, and of course, like all the more in the beginning, doing a lot of meeting with the clients, interacting a lot because the quicker we discover most of the difficulties, then the better it is for the what happened after. And one of my main conclusion here is at the beginning, you should not go too fast, and maybe related to what we had before, like with the crowdsourcing, it's very dangerous if you go too fast in the beginning, too big teams when things are not clear, because then you waste a lot of time when you have to come back. So you have to go slow in the beginning to spend a lot of time on review, and then you can speed up after, but once it's most of the issues are clarified.
Definitely, when you are working with a direct customer, you should lose time at the beginning of the project in order to save time at the end and the customer understand it perfectly. Paul, do you have any point on this?
Yeah, well, I fully agree with what just with what was said by Matthew and And if I go just to a lower level, it's true we see every day the impact of training period or training projects on the rest of the delivery of the labeling projects. It really helps both getting the labeling team aligned on the guidelines, but also getting clients aligned on their own guidelines and quality expectations. It helps foresee edge cases, which we can then learn from and anticipate for the rest of the production. And so I think, yes, taking it slow with the training period or projects is really mandatory prior to beginning any project.
Yeah, definitely, it's key. It's key. Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. So on this slide, it's maybe Paul, it will be for you, because as someone who has led many annotation projects, what is your feedback on this point of using the guidelines for training?
Yes, so guidelines are a good tool for multiple things within the project. So guidelines, of course, helps standardize the labeling team, as you will be able to gather examples of labeling. Also, you will input edge cases on how to label the data. So, for example, not extrapolating on hidden objects, things like that. So, and you should, they should live through the project. So, as you gather information, as you see mistakes, you are able to update them. But they are also useful before you even start the project. So to align your experts and your engineers and your business experts on, what should be the truth. And that's not always simple. The truth might sometimes not even really be defined, but at least it will help you take decision on, how should be labeled the data. And so it align everyone before starting the project, and then it helps align labelers when the project starts.
Yeah, it's true. It avoids duplicating all the materials for annotators too. And maybe Mathieu, on this point, what will be your advice for customers regarding the guidelines for training?
So my advice here will be that it's as Paula said, it's very important to have good initial guidelines, but you have to keep to remember that it's not enough. And even if your initial guidelines are great, are really nice, it's pretty clear that your guidelines will evolve. And I had this experience. It was clearly my fault, but the guidelines were so nice that at the beginning I said, oh, great, it's going to be perfect. And very quickly, we had some issues which were not related to the guideline, but just related to the fact that when you start to have like many labelers working on the data, a lot of things pop up. And so good guidelines are super important, but it's not enough. And it doesn't mean that there will not be any issue or edge case appearing after.
Yeah, definitely. So at the beginning of the project, to be really frank with the customer, to say, okay, it's super to have a good guidelines, but you will see that during the project, you may have to redo a little bit in order to cover all the edge case that we cover during the project. This is super clear. Thanks, guys, for this. Maybe next slide. And the next slide is a concrete example of what should be a good annotation guidelines. And maybe on this, do you have any things to add? Maybe Matthew on this regarding what should be in there, what should not be in there, etc., etc.
I'm not sure I have a clear something clear to add there on this specific topic, but I have a topic which is quite related to what I said before, is that like the initial guidelines are super important, but of course, during the project, there will be some question and answer file. There will be some discussion during meeting. And I think what's something which is not easy, but is important is to keep all this coherent, because sometimes it takes a lot of time to do guidelines, and the guidelines are not always updated. It can be dangerous because at some points, for example, if I have this issue, some new labelers arrive and we didn't update them with like all what was said after the guidelines, and this they relied on the initial guidelines, and there was some big difference. So I would say again, it's important to have good initial guidelines, but I think even if it takes time, it's probably important to update them if there are some big change during the project.
Okay, clear. Thanks a lot. I think it's pretty clear for the guidelines and the training point. Yeah, you can switch, go to the other one. Thanks. So in this slide, we will talk about the quality. As you may know, the quality is one of a key points of the annotation project, when there is a lot of discussion regarding this. So maybe in order to cover it, there is several KPIs who allow you to measure the quality of a project. Maybe what we should use, maybe it's more for you, Paul, at the beginning, what's the one we should definitely use on the project? What kind of project, so what kind of quality do I need to use, etc., etc. So what is your feedback on this point?
So to my knowledge, quality monitoring technique solutions should change depending on the level of quality you need to reach and the criticality of errors. For example, I mean, in security, errors might be really critical, so you might want to spend a lot of time monitoring that quality within your project, where it might be less critical in other examples. But what I think so far is mandatory from my experience and what I've seen is reviewing at some point. It should always be done, not on 100% of the data, but as we were saying earlier, early in the project, it's mandatory to have the owner of the quality on the client side as well, reviewing the data to make sure that everyone is aligned. And then, depending on that, you can of course use consensus, which helps you identify discrepancies in the data, disagreements, which will really often give you insights about the composition of a data set, because people will be disagreeing on a difficult data points or where the rules are not so clear. And of course, what we've built so far is a framework to help you identify, depending on the constraints of your projects, the right quality tool that you should be using. And it always starts, I think, with some review and some Q&A, and then honeypot or golden standard and a consensus are to be set up and quantified depending on everyone's constraints.
Okay, maybe Mathieu, another point of view on this.
Yes, so again, as Paul said, and I said before, like regarding review, it's really like the most important is in the beginning, and even like for consensus, we don't use it very often, but when we use it, it's mostly also at the beginning to really to let the edge case pop up. And yeah, it's I would say that yeah, review is super important, but especially in the beginning. I had this big project with 15 labelers. For the 2 or 3 first day, we had the 3 reviewers full time, and after 1 week, 1 reviewer was enough, because once like most has been clarified, like the review job is really like just to check that everything is still okay, but there is not that much to correct anymore. So it's really a lot in the beginning, and of course not only internal review, but of course review from the expert, review from the client to see, because like the team, they will ask a lot of questions, but there are things they could miss, and so the client, the end user, he had to check by himself also.
Okay, really clear on this. Thanks, guys. Maybe we can go to the other slide, please. Thanks a lot, Paul. So on this slide, very summary slide where we explain it to you, the project governance is really key for monitoring indicators. It is important to not work in silos. So we talk about it a lot with Mathieu, but it's really important to not work in silo and to monitor regularly with the key dedicated governance, with key points on a weekly basis, maybe at the beginning of a project, to monitor regularly in order to see if we are achieving the objective mentioned by the customer. So governance is key, really key, as Mathieu mentioned and Paul mentioned too. The communication between customer, project manager, annotation team is really key. So we have to spend a lot of time together at the beginning of a project in order to save time at the end. So maybe I don't know if you have remarks on this slide, guys, but I think this is the most important thing. Regular point, dedicated governance regarding the complexity of your project. And that's it.
Yeah, and yes, and being able to adapt as we go on the project with all stakeholders. So whether the clients, the people managing the labeling projects, and finding solutions as we go.
Definitely.
I was about to say the same. Yeah, of course, be agile. I mean, for example, you may have like every week one meeting, but suddenly if some big issues pop up, if you see like there are some questions that need to answer quickly, just do a meeting the same day, and it will be best.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe we can go to the next slide. And the next slide is the final point of our 8 points ways. It's has my project reached my objectives, and how I will use my my labels, and what happened after an annotation project. How do I assess my annotation project? Maybe Paul, do you have a point on this? Maybe.
Well, yes. So I think the success then depends on the goals which people have defined at the beginning. So maybe you've met a quantity of label data with some level of performance. If you are able, of course, to evaluate with the model, so the improvement of the model on the test set that you have prior, so it's always a good way to quantify the gain from having invested into quality and having spent time monitoring the data. But of course, what we see that when those workflow is respected, and it allows to reduce considerably the noise in the data set from a human activity, and what we see at that moment is usually that we can that performances goes up, and it's a good way to assess the success of the project.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Mathieu remarked on this.
I will say that from my own perspective, yeah, it's sometimes, for example, on very complex. I would say that on many projects, usually we don't have we don't have a very precise metric that we compute, but it's more like is the client's happy, it looks good, because it can be interesting to have a real metric, but usually it means also it takes a lot of time to get like you need a lot of. For example, if you want to compute the metric for the review, we had this example on the project, it was nearly taking the reviewer twice or three times as much time than just reviewing. So you have to take into account that really computing like an error matrix can take some time. And the most important is to, I see that on many projects, like the qualitative, okay, it looks really good. I look at a lot of labels and it looks good, is enough, but it's not always enough, but very often it's enough.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mathieu. And from my point of view, it's really important to reiterate again regarding the goal that you may have achieved or not regarding the annotation project that you have done, and to reiterate again, in order to annotate another data set and so on and so forth, it's really key. It's really key regarding the measuring of the success of your project. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So the next slide, basically, it's a slide, conclusion slide of the whole presentation, which we can share with you if you're interested. But basically, it take all in conclusion, all what we have just said with Paul, Mathieu, and I regarding the best practices for managing data annotation projects. Maybe, so thanks a lot. I think, Tamara, we have questions. So thanks a lot to have some questions. Yeah, so I see it. So maybe, so what is the typically process for project preparation / scoping? Thanks. Maybe Paul, can you answer to it?
So the typical workflow for framing and preparing a project. So usually we start with identifying the volume of data and so what should be the expected volume of the project, understanding also why, and then typically it always comes down to also computing how long it's going to take to get that volume, and to understand how long, it's where we have a process where we go through, then understanding the quality, the complexity of the task, understanding, so depending on the complexity, a lot of things comes up, because as we've seen, it will impact sourcing the right people, training the people as well. And so all of this impacts the project. And so then we go down in granularity. So the complexity of the tasks, then the quality levels, which are required depending on the criticality. And then we quickly start building interfaces, so really going into low-level details of the project, and everything is ready. We have a full process to kick off the project with the right people, the right stakeholders, and we start with the training period.
Okay. I think the training period that you mentioned, it will be for the next question. So the next question, is it important to do proof of concept before launching the project? And I think, Mathieu, I think you are the right person to answer it.
Yes. So I must admit that I'm a big fan of POC. I know it's not always possible. You have some clients, and usually like big companies, that want a price very quickly. But I think it's quite hard. I mean, it may seem okay. You add a bounding box, so when you add a bounding box, it should always be the same. But it's not the same at all. Like all the domain, all the images are very different. So even if it's like bounding box each time, depending on the complexity of the image, of the complexity of understanding what you need to label, there can be some big change and in how long. And for me, like it's what I really like when it's possible. It's like to work for one labeler 1 week, like 40 hours, and so we will really understand the task. We will understand the main edge case, the main difficulties, and at the end of the week, at the end of these 40 hours, like the time needed to label the data is really relevant, and it's really a good it really give you what will be the time needed for the end. And so when it's possible, I know it's not always possible, I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea to do that, to better scope, because otherwise there are so many uncertainties that you need to, okay, I'm not sure I will take like 40% more, because I'm not sure how long it will be in the end. So when possible, I really advise to do like this 1 week POC, which really help to frame and to better scope the project.
Thanks a lot. It's really clear, Mathieu. Maybe the next one will be for you, Paul. So, hello, do we need to set up a systemic list of KPIs to track the quality of the project?
Good question. So, as always, it depends a little. So, it's always a good way to track quality. So, as we said, I think it's always somehow mandatory at the start of the projects, because people are learning about the task. You want to make sure everything is well put before we go to production. But then, depending on the criticality of errors, and also depending on the other system you could use to solve those errors later on, then it is not always mandatory to have a KPI monitoring the quality on the long term, but if possible, it's always advised to do so.
Okay, maybe Mathieu, one point of this, or it's okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm repeating what I said before, but you have to remember that it takes time. If you, I mean, at least some of the KPIs, it's often require like having like an expert, having sometimes the client label some of the data itself, and so yeah, of course it's useful, but it takes time. So when like the reviewing some images is enough to convince you that the quality is good, yeah, from my own experience, it's not that often that we have like very clear and that we really have some KPIs that we compute all along the project.
Okay, thanks, Mathieu, for this point. Next and final question. When you start a project and need to adjust the guidelines after a while because some issues have popped up, do you relabel all your data? Any suggestion to avoid losing time relabeling data? Maybe for you, Mathieu, at the beginning, and then Paul at the end.
Actually, from my own experience, most of the time when there are some issues that pop up, it's not like we are gonna change everything. It's just like, okay, for this part of the classification, maybe we should change that a little. And so actually, most of the time it takes a little time, but we don't redo everything. For example, and with like the nice clear review capability and filtering, you will be able to select all these images where you can have problems, and it's quite quick to come back at that. So I will say that except if there was some real big issue, but most of the time it's small issues and it doesn't take a lot of time because you don't redo everything, you just change a little part on a part of the images. So yeah,
Okay.
I would say that.
Thanks, Mathieu. Maybe Paul on this?
Yes, on this, I think it always comes down to why it is so important to review at the beginning intensively the work, because you want to avoid having to redo a lot of data. And yeah, as Mathieu said, sometimes it is so you'll be able to prioritize only a couple elements to redo, so you won't have to go through your entire data set. But I've seen the example once where actually a big chunk of data had to be relabeled. So I think that's when the possibility to easily interact with the work done by the labelers, have the Q&A process, having people to talk to when starting your project and when you release the data is really a time saver in the end, because it will help you avoid as much as possible those type of situations.
Okay, it's really clear. Thanks, Mathieu. Thanks, Paul. we don't have any more questions. So it was a real pleasure. Thanks, Mathieu, and thanks, Paul, for your help on this. Maybe Tamara, I will let you conclude.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Antoine, as well. It's really been a pleasure. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us in future. And the presentation will be available for everyone who wants to have it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.